This is the in-depth analysis of the rules of Ultimate Goal. Ultimate Goal is this year's challenge. And my name is Alan Elliott. I'm from Pioneer Robotics, team 12589. So first of all, the most important part of this game is the playing field. You have to understand the playing field before you really understand what we're doing in this year's game, right? So the playing field is important because, let's go over a couple of the components. The first thing here is the tower, right? The tower has 3 goals: a high goal right here, a medium goal right here, and a low goal right here. Does anyone have any issues seeing anything? Can you all see this? If you can't, just again communicate. So you have the goals and you have the 3 towers. You want to shoot the goals into the tower, and the higher the tower, the higher the goal is, the more points you get. You also have these power shot targets right here with little plastic rods that are very light, and you use these foam rings to knock them down, right? And those can be reset with this little bar here. You have these 3 squares called target zone goals, and they're labeled A, B, and C. We'll get into that later. We have a very important white line right here, a little bit over the middle of the field, a little bit on the other side of the field right here. That's a launch line. It's pretty important when you're trying to score goals. You have the launch zone, which is the whole area behind the launch line. You have the starter stack, which is where you play some rings start at the beginning of the autonomous period. And then you have the starting lines, right? You place your robot there, and you have the wobble goes at the head of those start lines. You also have the driver station, the human player station, and the drop zone. We'll get into that. I'll be using a lot of this terminology just because I feel that it's very important to understand the terminology. And if you use common terminology with other people, they'll also understand what you're talking about. So let's first get into the pre-match period. What is the pre-match period? The pre-match period is when you just put your robot on the ground. The game hasn't started. You can step on the field or whatever. You don't have to really, it's pretty loose. I don't know, it's preparing for the match. Pre-match, pretty self-explanatory. What you have to do is you have to place the robot in any orientation. So it doesn't really matter, but you have to place it on one of these 2 starting lines right here. Can you guys see my mouse? Yes? No? If you don't answer, I'm assuming yes. So yeah, you place your robot on one of these 2 starting lines right over here, and your robot has to touch or break the plane of the boundary right here. This boundary on the opposite of the tower goals. So you place your robot on this line and it has to have its back against the wall, or it has to have an arm like stretching over the wall. Either way, you have to be really close to this wall here. But what's interesting is you can place your robot in any orientation, doesn't really matter. And you must preload a wobble goal from the field onto your robot. So these wobble goals, they're little, I don't know. It's a you can see it in right here. See this? It's a little plastic thing with a hemisphere on the bottom. If you tip it, it just wobbles around and stuff. It's kind of hard to knock down. It's a pretty interesting game element. You have to preload it onto your robot, so your robot can hold it, your robot can be grasping it. Your robot basically has to be in control of it. Okay.
I've got a question.
Sure. What is it?
So you said about touching the back wall. So yes. Can like a wheel touch that as well besides just
anything? Robot? Yeah, anything. So your robot has to start within an 18-inch by 18-inch by 18-inch cube, right? So any part of the robot within that 18-inch by 18-inch by 18-inch area, volume, has to touch that.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah. So again, that 18 by 18 by 18 volume is where your robot has to start. But obviously, after the game starts, your arms and stuff can extend out of there. But what's interesting is you have to hold the goal, and your arms still have to be within that 18 by 18 by 18 volume. Your wobble goal can stick out of there, but your robot has to still be there. So if you have like an arm that holds a wobble goal in front of your robot that sticks out of the 18 by 18 by 18 volume, you can't do that. It has to be retracted. Your robot has to be fully retracted and holding it. What they don't specify here is which wobble goal you can choose. So for example, again, this is what's interesting about reading the rules. You kind of get these kind of loopholes. I don't know. So your robot can be on the right line or the left line. There's only one robot in the remote event, right? So you can choose whichever one is better for you. I would recommend the right line just because it's closer to these zones, but again, do whatever fits you. Many robots will have completely different strategies, completely different methods for approaching this. So do what suits you. So say you start on the right side, right? You can pick up the right goal and put it in your robot, or you can pick up the left goal and put it in your robot. The other one stays exactly where it is. So you might be able to use that to your advantage. Maybe you can be on the left goal, pick up on the left line, pick up the right goal, put it in your robot. The left goal could still be in front of you, and maybe you can use that to, like, I don't know, when you're traveling from here to here, you can just go in a straight line. That's something that people may not think about. That's thinking outside the box. Usually most people say, yeah, just take the one on your line, but you might be able to use that to your advantage. So again, I'll be going over these kind of tips and tricks a lot more. That's kind of the theme of this. So yeah, that's kind of interesting, something that I didn't really see the rules were clear about. One thing I recommend is going on the FTC forums. The forums are the final source for rules. They actually override the game manual. The game manual is where I got this information from, but the FTC forums is where people can ask questions and referees can respond to them, right? FTC administrators can respond to them, and what they say is law. So even if they say, like, for example, if they say the game manual says you can preload 3 rings, if for some reason, this is not going to happen, but if some reason someone says you can preload 4 rings, then what they say goes. Actually, it overrides this. I highly doubt they're ever going to say that, but yeah, their interpretation of the rules is like the Supreme Court. Whatever they say is the correct interpretation. It becomes the law of the game. So you can preload 3 rings onto your robot as well as a wobble goal, but this is not required. The wobble goal is required. This is not. So you can preload 0 rings, you can preload 3 rings, you can preload anything in between. I want to say it is it's not a good idea to not have 3 rings on your robot, because any rings that aren't in your robot go in the goal and you can't take them out of the goal. They'll just stay there until teleop starts. So they're basically points you're just throwing away. You can use those rings and score them, and you can do a lot of great things with these rings. So if you choose not to put the rings on your robot, it's not a very good idea. You just reduce the amount of total points you can get. So yeah, you can have 3 rings on your robot, but you can't preload the rings onto the wobble goal itself. You have to have them separate. Maybe you can have the wobble goal, have the rings, and once the game starts, you can put them on the wobble goal, but you can't preload them, right? So yeah, and you have rings also in the starter stack in the pre-match, but we'll get into that into autonomous. But what happens is, so you put your robot down, you touch the back wall, you load a goal, you load up to 3 rings. I recommend 3 rings, and you stop and you initialize the robot. So for anyone who's done FTC before, this will be really straightforward. But for someone who hasn't, initialization is when your code, which is on an Android phone, you basically press the button to start the game. So you basically initialize the code, but you don't run it. There's 2 steps when you're going to be running your code. You press the button to basically turn on your robot, and then you press the second button to run your code. So you press that first button in the pre-match period. So let's go into autonomous. Randomization, right? That's the second part of the pre-match. So you initialize your code and you wait. Now what they do is they randomize the field. So field personnel, that'll actually be you because this is a remote game. So we'll see how that goes. It's questionable, but yeah. They'll randomize the field into 3 configurations based on a dice roll. If it's 1 and 4, you get case A. If it's 2 and 5, you get case B. If it's 3 and 6, you get case C. Basically, it's a 1 in 3 chance of getting either of these random configurations. So you start your robot, right? And you select the code your robot wants to run and you start it. Then they randomize the field. So you can't actually say, you can't look at the field and say, oh, this is case C, let me run case C code. This is case A, let me run case A code. You can't do that. You have to run one program that runs regardless of the cases. That's probably something you'll have to code up in autonomous to recognize that. But yeah, you have 3 randomizations. And what's special about these is that in the first randomization, you have a starter stack, this little blue square, or not blue, red square, sorry. It's a little tape square. It's right here, these rings right here in the starter stack. And what you do is, in each of those cases, you have to have a separate amount of rings on the square. That's how you tell, right? So if it's case A, you have no rings on the red square. If it's case B, you have 1 ring on the red square. In this case C, you have 4 rings on the red square. So case C gives you a lot more opportunity to score. There's obviously more potential to score more rings, but it's also harder because you have to, we'll get into it, but there's a lot more things that are, case C is a lot more complicated than case A or B, but it's gives you a higher chance to score more points. So case C is very high risk, high reward. Case A is low risk, low reward. Case B is kind of a happy medium. So yeah, and what you do is when you have case A, B, or C, the target zones you'll have to score into also change. So if it's case A, you have this close target zone. If it's case B, you have this slightly farther target zone. If you have case C, you have this farthest target zone. If you want to compare that, this is where you start. This is case A, B, and C. So case C is considerably farther than case A. And what you have to do is you have to take, in autonomous, you have to take those wobble goals and deposit them into these target zones. So case C provides a considerably harder challenge. So again, case C gives you more rings, more opportunity to score, but it's a harder challenge. Do what you will with that information. Any questions?
Yeah, about so there's those rings and like that little square. Can you take those or no?
You can take those. We'll get into that. So your question will be answered. I'm not going to go over it right now because it'll be a little bit confusing, but we'll get into it. So again, case A, 0 rings on the stack. Case B, 1 ring on the stack. Case C, 4 rings on the stack. So you can figure out which case you're in by looking at how many rings are there in autonomous. So let's get into the autonomous overview, right? Let's go into part 1 of the scoring. Now, in my opinion, autonomous and endgame are the deciding factor, specifically autonomous. Autonomous is huge in this game. You can score so many points on autonomous as compared to previous years. This is a very autonomous heavy game. Again, for anyone who doesn't know, the autonomous period is where your robot goes off on its own and makes its own decisions. You press a button and the robot uses its sensors and pre-programmed code to go around and score points. Okay, so you push a button, the robot does it by itself. You don't tell it what to do. And that's, I think, a very significant portion of the game just because of what we'll get into. So, so the first thing is delivery. So you have to deliver, again, what I was saying before, you have to take that wobble goal you have in your hand and deliver it into the target zone. You can also go and pick up the second wobble goal and deliver that as well. So at the end of autonomous, they'll look at where the wobble goals are. And if they're in the correct zone, they'll give you 15 points per wobble goal. So if you have case A, you have to deliver into the zone A. If you have case B, you have to deliver in zone C, and same thing for case C. And why I highlighted this, completely in the target zone. Now, completely in is a special term used in FTC to mean it doesn't break the vertical plane. What does that mean? So say you have that red square, right? Your wobble goal has to be completely inside that red square. No part of the wobble goal can be like on that line. It can't be touching that line or crossing that line. That red box has a vertical plane basically extending into the air. Say like this is the red box on the ground. There's like a boundary, like a wall, a virtual wall, like imaginary wall on the outside of that box. And you basically have to put that wobble goal inside those 4 walls. It can't be touching those walls. It can't be breaking those walls. It has to be completely inside. So you can't be touching the tape, you can't be over the tape, you can't be crossing the tape, it has to be completely in the tape. If it's touching the tape or outside the tape, it doesn't even count. So if it's half in, half out, does not count, you get 0 points. It has to be completely inside. And I want to make that very, very clear. That's what completely in means. Usually in FTC, you score the other way around, that you have to break the plane. So what that means is you can be completely inside of the thing, or you could just cross a line or whatever. That's usually how we score. But this time you have to be completely inside of it. So that gives you the chance for up to 30 points for scoring both of the goals, right? The second part is navigation. So navigation is basically parking your robot on that launch line, this little white line over here at the end of autonomous. That will give you 5 points, okay? So when autonomous is done, you want to do all of your little actions, go around, do whatever strategy you want. But at the end, you have to come back to this launch line. And if you do that, you get 5 points, okay? And this is, again, you don't have to be completely in the launch line. You have to cross the plane of the launch line. So you take that launch line and pretend like it extends upward and makes a wall. Your robot just has to cross that wall. So it doesn't even have to touch the launch line. What you can do is say you have the launch line, you stick your arm out over it. That counts. You don't have to actually touch the line. You have to just be above it. Okay, you can touch it, you can cross it, you can be above it, but it's kind of like the opposite of completely in. Any part of your robot just has to cross that line. So what you can actually do is you can be in this far corner over here, and you can stick out a little tape measure and cross this launch line, and it'll still count. And I say tape measure because that's something that, again, Pioneer Robotics has been to the World Championships for Rover Ruckus, and something that I've seen a lot of Worlds teams do is they have a little tape measure that they use to get really far. So like they can spend a lot of time doing other things, and at the last second, instead of taking the time to travel to the line, they can stick out an arm or stick out a tape measure to cross the line and get all the points, which is a really great strategy because you don't have to spend all that time traveling there. A tape measure will go probably faster than your robot, or maybe you want your robot to be in a certain place that's advantageous to your strategy. I don't know. So again, breaking that launch line is pretty important. The fact that you realize that you just have to cross it, you don't have to be on it, is something that you can use to your advantage. So that's part one. Part two is scoring with the game elements, with the rings, right? So you have a ring, right? You have these foam rings that are on the field, right? And what you have to do is you have to score them. The little rings, I think they're 5 inches in diameter. So what you have to do is if you score these rings completely in a goal. So you have that goal, right, that I mentioned before, right here. Let's go back up. These goals right here, it has to be completely in the goal. So it can't be like teeter-tottering on the edge. It can't be like, you can't go in and go out. It has to go in and has to stay in. If the ring goes out of the goal, it does not count. So you have to completely throw it into the goal. And if it's completely in the goal, it earns points. So if you score in the lowest goal, you get 3 points. If you score in the middle goal, you get 6 points. And if you score in the highest goal, you earn 12 points. Now, the robot has to be completely in the launch zone. So you see this launch line right here? Your robot has to be behind that line. If any of you are familiar with basketball, it's kind of like the 3-point line. You have to be behind the line when you shoot the ring. And if it goes in when you shoot the ring and you're behind that line, then you get the points. This doesn't apply for the low goal. Now, what the low goal is, you can go to the low goal and you can just drop the rings in right in front of it. That's perfectly fine. But for the middle goal and the high goal, you have to be behind the line when you shoot them. Otherwise, you get a major penalty and you lose 30 points. Let me say that again. If you score from the mid goal and the high goal, say you're in front of the launch line and you shoot it into the high goal, what they'll do is they will give you those 12 points, but they'll also hit you with a major penalty and subtract 30 points. So you will lose 18 points in total. If you're in front of the launch zone, right, in front of the launch line, and you shoot into the middle goal, you'll get those 6 points, but you lose 30 points. Again, netting you negative 24 points. So it is a very, very, very bad idea to shoot goals from in front of the launch line. Now you might be saying, okay, this is an autonomous period. What if my robot's just a little bit in front of the launch line? What if I make a small mistake? What if it's an accident? That's fine. They will look at your robot, and if it's like barely over the line, or if it's inconsequential, like that means by accident. If your robot's accidentally like has like a wheel over the line, or like has an arm like just crossing the line or whatever, they'll say, okay, that's fine. But if your robot's like blatantly over the line, like it's half the robot's in front of the line, or like the entire robot's in front of the line, they're not gonna let that slide. So they'll give you a couple of inches of wiggle room, that's fine. But you have to be very careful that you do not cross that launch line, okay? So, and don't take advantage of that wiggle room. Don't do it, because if there's some error and if you like overshoot it, you're gonna really regret it. You're gonna lose a lot of points. So I'm interested to see how that'll affect the game, because sometimes if a team messes up and they cross the launch line and they shoot all their rings, they will lose a lot of points. They'll go into the negatives very quickly. This bold part right here, the mid goal counts for your own team in remote. Now, based on the video that they showed, for that FTC showed, what happens is in the in-person competition, you have teams facing off against each other. The thing is, the top goal and the bottom goal score you points for your own team, but the middle goal does not score points. It scores points for the other team. To score points for the middle goal, you have to go to the other team's goal and shoot in their middle goal, right? But that's not the case here. That's something that may be confusing for teams. In the remote event, all 3 goals score you points for your own team, not for the enemy team. Okay, and that's outlined basically by, like, again, that might be a little bit confusing. So in person, the middle goal is for the other team. In remote, all goals are for your own team because there is no other team, right? So just want to let you know, you can score in the middle goal as much as you want, does not really matter. The last part of autonomous is the power shot targets. Again, I mentioned that those are the little plastic rods that are really light. You have to hit them with the rings and knock them from front to back. Okay, and there's 3 of them. And if you hit the power shot targets from front to back, you gain 15 points each. And one thing that Pioneer Robotics was a little bit confused about is we looked at this diagram and we said, hey, maybe we can use these rings and knock over those power shot targets with 1 ring. Like we can use 1 ring to knock over 2 targets at the same time, which was a pretty big breakthrough. But and we thought that was true until we actually got the game board. We realized it's pretty much impossible to actually do that. You have to be shooting from like right here and you have to hit this ring and this ring. It's not going to be possible in front of the launch line. The same penalty applies as well. So if you're in front of the launch line and you shoot these power shot targets and you knock one over, you get the 15 points, but you also lose 30 points. So again, you lose 15 points in total. So again, you want to be behind the launch line when you're shooting into the goals, or you're knocking down the power shot targets. Does anyone have any questions about shooting into goals or power shot targets or any loopholes or whatever? No? Give you a couple seconds. Okay, so yeah, again, recap. You take the rings in your robot and you shoot them into the goals or the power shot targets. Buzzer beaters count. What does that mean? Again, this is another basketball term. A buzzer beater in basketball is when you shoot a shot, the shot is in the air and the time runs out. Then after the time's run out, the basketball goes into the net and that point counts. That's the same situation here. So let me reiterate. If you have a ring and you shoot the ring and the ring's in the air when the time runs out, if the ring goes into the goal or knocks over the power shot target, the shot counts. So you have to shoot before the time ends, but you don't have to score before the time ends. So if there's like 1 second left, you can still shoot a ring and the time runs out, and if it still scores, you get the points. So that might get you a point, like that might get you like a ring or 2 or like a power shot target or 2, which could be 12 to 15 points, pretty substantial. So that's the end of autonomous. So again, what you have to do is you have to take those wobble goals, deliver them to the goals, right? These target zones. You have to shoot the rings into the goals and knock over these 3 power shot targets. You then have to go and park on this launch line once you're done with everything. Okay, so let's go into teleop period. Teleop is the phrase we use in FTC to refer to the driver controlled period. So when I say teleop, I mean driver controlled period. Okay, same thing. So when you control your robot with the controllers, you directly tell the robot what to do. You have 2 people controlling the robot. You also have a human person. So yeah, you're no longer pressing a button and the robot runs by itself. Now you are driving the robot as if it's a remote controlled car. Okay. So in teleop, it's actually very similar to the scoring part 2 of autonomous. You have to take the rings and score them into the goals. It's pretty straightforward. So you also have a human player in teleop, right? The human player is from your own team. It's a member of your team. What he does is once you score goals, he takes the rings from the goals and he sends them back through the return rack. The return rack is right here. It's kind of a chute that you put the ring into and it rolls back onto the field. It's pretty cool. I think so. It's meant to kind of randomizes where the ring lands because it's kind of an inconsistent thing. But I think if you have a human player that actually practices depositing the rings, they can get kind of consistent with it. That's a pretty advanced strategy. But again, that will at Worlds you definitely see people like really getting consistent with using the return rack. So again, so you're supposed to use the rings to you're supposed to return the rings via the return rack. You have 1 human player doing that. The human player is also supposed to reset the power shot targets. Again, in autonomous, you shot the targets and they went from the forward position like this to the backwards position like this. The human player will reset that in teleop. So there's a little bar that they use to shove them back forward. You can't score those power shot targets in teleop again. You can't do that. You can only do that during endgame. If you do score the power shot target in teleop, it just doesn't count and they can just reset it again. It's a waste of time to even shoot. You don't get any points, so why would you do that? Like maybe if you do it by accident, I don't know. But yeah, they can reset it as many times as they need to. They could just, so in autonomous, they start forward, they get knocked back. In teleop, you send them from back to forward again. So you just reset them, okay? That's what the human player does. And what's interesting is by endgame is a period after teleop. It's like the last 30 seconds of teleop. You can, in endgame, you can score those power shot targets again. You can't do it in teleop, you can do it in endgame. So if the human player forgets to reset the power shot targets, that's it. You can't score them at endgame. They just stay back. You can't reset them once you're in endgame. So it is imperative like that the human player resets those power shot targets. You have to do that. I mean, it takes like a half a second. It is not a costly maneuver. So I don't see why anyone wouldn't do that. So once teleop starts, human player, put them forward. Okay. So teams can't score those power shot targets before endgame. Again, in like teleop, you can't score them. So the second part, the only part actually, is scoring rings. So you can't score power shot targets. You can't do anything with the wobble goals or whatever. The only thing you can do is shoot rings. So teleop is a lot more straightforward this year. It's a lot more simple this year. And autonomous is a lot more complicated this year. You get a lot more points this year. In driver controlled period, you take the rings on the field or in your robot. You can control up to 3 rings. If you control 4 rings, that's a penalty. Okay, and you will lose a lot of points if you control 4 rings. It's not worth it. So you can control up to 3 rings this year. And what you have to do is you score rings into the goals and only the goals, not the power shot targets again, into the goals. If you score into the low goal, you get 2 points. If you score into the middle goal, you get 4 points. If you score into the high goal, you get 6 points. So it's exactly the same thing as scoring. It's the same rules and everything apply as autonomous ring scoring, but this time the points are different. In autonomous, it's 3, 6, and 12. Here it's 2, 4, and 6. Okay, so you get less points for scoring rings in driver controlled period than you do in autonomous, but that's because like a human player is controlling it, so it's a lot easier. You also want to collect rings on the field. What does that mean? The human player, again, takes those rings and puts them back into the field via the return rack, right? So the rings drop back into the field. You can pick them up, go behind the launch line, and shoot them again. Again, the same rules apply as autonomous. You have to shoot everything behind that launch line. You can't be in front of it, otherwise you lose those 30 points again. This time, the penalty is a lot more severe because if you shoot a ring into the high goal for 6 points, you gain 6 points and lose 30. So now you lose 24 instead of like, what was it, 18? And this time, again, a little bit of wiggle room is fine, but I think, it's my opinion, I have no real factual evidence for this, but my opinion is that they'll be a bit more stricter with the crossing the line, because in autonomous, you cannot control the robot. So if the robot just goes a little bit forward, they'll be fine with that. But in teleop, you could drive the robot and you're seeing where the launch line is. So they're going to be a lot stricter about crossing that launch line. They're like, okay, look, you can see the robot, you can control the robot, you know the robot's crossing the line and you still decided to shoot it, you're getting a 30-point penalty. So you still want to be launch line, be a little bit more careful, especially in teleop, because you can control the robot. Maybe your human player can do that job. Maybe you can have the human player communicate to you, hey, look, dude, the robot is in front of the launch line. You probably want to move that back. And so, yeah, it's pretty straightforward. That's pretty much it for the driver control period. Any questions about teleop?
So about like you were saying earlier, for like a remote event or something.
Yeah.
Are the points, like say you shoot in the middle goal, are they still going towards you or are they going towards someone else?
Oh, yes, thank you. Yeah, again, it's just like autonomous. The rules are exactly the same. So in the real event, shooting in the middle goal will score points for your opposing team, so that's not good. But in the remote event, the middle goal scores points for your own team. It's just like autonomous. The rules for autonomous ring scoring and teleop ring scoring are exactly the same, except for the point values. The point values are lower in teleop than autonomous, but that's it. That's the only difference. Everything else is completely the same. So, and again, you're supposed to score rings in autonomous as well. So teleop is not that different. Teleop's not like a special thing this year. In past years, teleop was a pretty important part of the game. It was gave you a chance to score a lot of points. This year, autonomous is really important because one ring only scores you 6 points, whereas shooting those 3 power shot targets in autonomous gains you 45 points. So it is, yeah. So, okay, endgame. What is endgame? Endgame, for people who haven't done FTC before, is the last 30 seconds of the driver controlled period. Okay, so it's still part of the teleop period. So the teleop rules still apply, but it adds a bit more, I don't know, it's the last 30 seconds of the game. So what can you do in endgame? Well, in endgame, there's a lot more opportunities to score. So in endgame now, remember in teleop, you reset those power shot targets from back to forward. Now in endgame, you can shoot those targets again, and those 3 targets again, and move them back. Now, once you shot them, you cannot reset it. So in teleop, you can reset them forward. Shooting the targets don't do anything. You can reset as much as you need to, right? Most likely you'll just do it once. But in endgame, you cannot reset it. The human player can't touch that bar to reset those power shot targets. You shoot it once, it's down, that's it. So let's recap the power shot targets. In autonomous, you can shoot all 3 targets once each. And once you shoot them, they're down. In teleop, you can reset them. In endgame, you could again shoot all 3 of those once each, and they'll be down and you can't reset them. So you have 2 chances in total to shoot each ring. So in total, that gives you 90 points if you shot all 6 targets, 3 in autonomous, 3 in endgame. 90 points is the max you can get. You can't shoot it, reset it, and shoot it again. That will be, there are a lot of penalties associated with that. You do not want to go there. Not a good idea. And again, you have to be behind that launch line when you shoot. It's the same rule as autonomous. You have to be behind the launch line when you're shooting those power shot targets. You can continue to score rings into the goals just like you did in teleop. So endgame is an extension of teleop. It's an addition to teleop. It's not a different game. Like autonomous and teleop are completely different from each other. There's different rules and everything. But in endgame, it is the same game as the same game as teleop. It's just extra rules are added onto it. So you can still score rings into the main goal. You can now additionally shoot those power shot targets. Again, each of them earns 15 points. And again, those rings have to start endgame in the forward position. If your human player forgets to do that in teleop, you cannot score the rings now. So if you shot them from forward to back in autonomous and you forgot to reset them, now you can't score that ring. So that's 15 points, potential points that you just thrown out the window. And it's so easy to just push that thing forward. Your robot doesn't have to do it. It's a human player doing it. So there's no excuse for not doing that. So you have to do it. And what they do is they give you a 10-second grace period. I haven't talked about that, but basically teleop ends and endgame starts. And in the first 10 seconds of endgame, you can also reset the thing. I'm not going to go into that because, like, why would you do that? You basically have a lot of time until you have to just push that thing forward. So I don't know why you want to wait to the 10-second period of endgame to just set those forward. Again, you can't shoot the ring in the first 5 seconds, reset it, and shoot it again. That doesn't count. You can only reset it once. So if you can't shoot that thing twice, it's not allowed. So yeah, I mean, I thought you could do that, but like, no, you can't. I don't even know why they have a 10-second grace period. I don't. It doesn't really make sense to me. I don't see why there's a need for that, but they do have it. So say you somehow forget until you have to reset them and endgame starts, you're like, oh no, I haven't reset the targets. You can do it in the first 10 seconds. So yeah. You can score the power shot targets in any order. You don't have to go left to right, right to left, middle, left, right. Again, it doesn't matter. Shoot any of them in any order as long as you get as many as you can down, right? I highly prioritize shooting the power shot targets over scoring goals. Who can tell me how many points you score for the high goal in Teleyop? Anyone? I said it on the previous slide.
6.
Yeah, six. So you score 6 points for the high goal, 4 points for the middle goal, and 2 points for the low goal. You score 15 points for the power shot target. So you want to aim for those power shot targets before you dedicate more time to scoring those goals, right? Power shot targets give you way more points. One ring can get you 15 points in power shot. One ring can get you 6 points in the goal. So again, focus on power shots. Again, the last thing is targets are scored at rest. What does that mean? Again, scored at rest is another rules game manual term, just like completely in and breaking the plane. Scored at rest means if you hit the power shot target and it's moving and the game ends, they still let it fall. So wherever like the game ends and everything stops, right? Everyone shuts off the robot and everything. Then they look at the field. So say that thing was like moving when the game ends. Wherever it ends up is where it's scored. Okay, so say you shoot the power shot target, it goes back, right? And the game ends, and somehow it bounces and comes back forward or something after the game is ended, you actually don't get those points. Okay, you don't get those points. Only where the power shot target ends up matters. So yeah, that's what it means. They get scored at rest. So that's just power shots. The second part of endgame is wobble goals. So at the start of endgames, you take those wobble goals in the target zones that you remember. In autonomous, you took the wobble goals from here to one of these 3 target zones, depending on the case you were in, right? And you deliver them there. Now in endgame, you can take those wobble goals from the square and bring them back to the drop zone. So what does that mean? So in endgame, your robot drives over to say B, picks up that wobble goal in B, drives back here and drops it over the wall into the end zone and into the drop zone. Okay? Any questions about that? Again, you take the target, bring it back, throw it over this wall here. You have, I think, so it says this area is really small, like it looks kind of short, but actually it extends from this wall all the way to the audience. So you have, I think, theoretically, we have unlimited space to just throw the thing over. So you don't have to worry about putting it close to the wall ever. You can just chuck it over. It doesn't really matter. Actually, sorry, you can't chuck it over. You have to place it there. You can't chuck it. So you drop it, you put it down, you let go. So you can't throw it. But again, it doesn't matter how far you place it there. One thing is a tipped goal counts as scored. So if you drop the goal and the wobble goal tips over and doesn't like tip back or whatever, that still counts. So all you have to do is just drop it over this wall and you get 20 points. You have to do that before the end of the match. Again, these are also scored at rest. So once the match is over, they look, okay, how many goals are there? Then they score. Like the moment you place it there, you actually don't get the points. You get the points at the end of the match. So you have 2 wobble goals, right? And you can score each of them for 20 points. Now, any wobble goal that you didn't deliver to these target zones, sorry. Any of these wobble goals that aren't in this highlighted area at the start of endgame cannot be scored. So if there's a wobble goal that like is still on the start line or is like over here or somewhere in the launch zone, you can't score those. So say 5 seconds before endgame, the goal's right here. Endgame starts, you take this goal, you drop it over the drop zone, that doesn't count. You get 0 points for that. Okay? To make those goals eligible, you have to either put them inside these squares or past the launch line. So basically this highlighted area is where you can put those goals. So this is something that I think 75% of people will miss. Okay, it's something that was very small. They said it has to be over the launch line or in one of these target zones. So in autonomous, say you miss the target zone, say you drop the goal like over here on this side and you don't get the points because you didn't deliver it properly, they're still eligible to be scored in endgame, even though you missed, as long as it's over the launch line or in one of these squares. And you notice this funny shape right here, this kind of extends over because this part right here, this small like jut, it kind of juts out, right? This small little area right here is part of a target zone, but it's not after the launch line. But that still counts because it's past the launch line or in a zone. So again, this whole area is where you can do it. Now, what does that mean for the strategy? What this means is that you can have say you deliver the target zone to zone C in autonomous. Now in endgame, you have to travel all the way to zone C and bring it all the way back to drop zone. You have to travel the entire length of the field. What you can do is during teleop, you can pick up one of these goals, move it to A. Let me say that again. In teleop, you can pick it from C and move it to A. As long as it's still within that highlighted area, it counts. So say you have KC, you score it in KC and autonomous. In teleop, once you've gotten the points for autonomous, you can move it back to case A where it's a little bit closer to make your job easier. This is a major like loophole or whatever, something that a lot of people will not consider. It will make your game a lot better. I think most people will end up implementing this because like at competitions and stuff, people will see, oh wait, this is something that we can do. Yeah, I'm going to do this. I think it's advantageous. I'll go over that into more depth later. So, and the second thing you can do is you can take those wobble goals that are in that is in this area and bring it back to the start line. So you see these two lines over here. If you break the plane of the start line, again, break that vertical boundary of the start line, you get 5 points instead of 20 points. Now, I don't know why anyone would do that. It's kind of like not loading rings onto your robot. Why put the wobble goal on this little thin line when you could just drop it over the wall and get 15 more points? You're just leaving points on the table. If your robot can drop it over the drop zone, you should drop it over the drop zone. So the only time I would think that anyone would just put it on the line is if they have 1 second left, they just have to drop it. So, but 99% of the time, just drop it over, get all those 20 points. So again, you can get 40 points max. If you take those wobble goals and put them on the lines, you only get 10 points instead of 40. That's not good. So again, you just have to touch. Oh, also the wobble goals can be, you can put rings on those goals. So if we go all the way back up to where's right here, you see these little sticks on the wobble goals. They have these little bars, kind of like I don't know how to. That's where you grip the wobble goal. You can put rings on that wobble goal. So what you can do with those rings is you can, in teleop and in endgame, you can put rings onto the wobble goal. And at the end of the match, any rings that are on the wobble goal give you 5 points. And because there are 10 rings in total, so there are 3 rings that start on your robot, there's some rings in the launch zone, and any extra rings are put in the goal. Now, during teleop and endgame, the human player can take them out of the goal and put them back into the field via the return rack. So at any point, there could be up to 10 rings on the field. If you somehow put all 10 rings onto these wobble goals, you can get 5 points per ring. So that's 50 points. And this is where you have to be very, very precise and you have to know the rules. They have to be on the wobble goal and they can't touch the ground or the robot at the end of the match. So let me make that clear. You actually don't have to put it on that stick. You can just lean it on the wobble goal or whatever. As long as it doesn't touch the ground and it's not touching a robot, you will get those points. So let's say somehow you put 4 rings on the wobble goal, you drop it over and you have a 5th ring and you kind of just try to put it on that last wobble goal and it doesn't go on that stick, that's fine. As long as it's touching the wobble goal and it's not touching the ground, you will get those points. So there's some weird configurations that you can see. Actually, why don't I do that? Let me see. I want to show you a really cool picture that I saw. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and switch it to this. If you see right here, let me zoom in. See ring A right here? That actually counts. It's not on the stick, but it's not touching the ground and it's not touching the robot and it's on the wobble goal. So that counts. Ring B and C also count because they're on the wobble goal. Ring D also counts. It's not touching that stick. It's just touching the wobble goal. It's not touching the ground. Now ring E does not count because it's being supported by the ground as well. So if the wobble goal is the only thing supporting the ring, you get the points. If the ground is supporting the ring or the robot is supporting the ring, it doesn't even have to be lifting up the ring, it just has to be touching it to be supporting. So you see this ring right here, ring G, that the robot's gripping, that does not count. You get 0 points for that, and you don't get any points for ring E. Every other ring you get points for. So ring F, you get points for that. Technically, ring B and C are being supported by ring G, right? They're being supported by the ring that's supporting that the robot is holding a ring, and that ring is holding other rings. Those other rings will be scored, but the ring that it's directly holding won't be scored. So it's technically indirectly being supported by the robot, but it's still eligible to be scored. So this is a picture that you can refer to when you're confused about how the rings are being scored. This is in Game Manual Part 2. It's on page 30 out of 31. It's at the end of the book. It's in Appendix E. So that's something that you can look into. Again, if you want to read more about the rules and everything, I recommend that you just look up Ultimate Goal Game Manual Part 2, and it'll come up. Okay. Okay. So that's how you score wobble goal rings, and that's pretty much it for the game rules. So again, let's go over it. In autonomous, you take the wobble goals, deliver it into the goals. You score rings into these goals. You can also shoot the power shot targets with the rings. Buzzer beaters will count. You then have to park on this launch line at the end of autonomous. In driver control period, you take those rings, you shoot them into the goals, and that's it. You also have to reset the power shot targets. In end game, you can again shoot those power shot targets. You can also take those wobble goals and throw them over the wall into the drop zone. You can also put rings onto the wobble goals and get 5 points per ring. So that's how you get your points in the game. Now we'll discuss optimal strategy. Optimal strategy is the most efficient way of going about the game. So this is where things get interesting. So let's go over it. I'm trying to take advantage of the rules as much as possible, okay? And you want to be just doing the best you can. You want to be performing as well as you can to get as many points, okay? So first thing you do is, let's say it's case A. Case A gives you the least amount of points in autonomous just because there's 0 rings in the starter stack, okay? So the first thing you do is you start with 3 rings and a wobble goal on the robot. There's 0 rings in the stack, so you pull up to the launch line, right? Let's say, so what you do is go here, the part of the launch line that's part of target zone A. Not this part, not like, don't go behind this launch line, this part of the launch line, go behind this part of the launch line and shoot all 3 of your rings to knock down 3 power shot targets. Now that's gonna be kind of difficult because that's kind of far away. But what you can do is, while you're shooting those rings, you could also drop your wobble goal into that square. So you're behind the line, you're shooting, and you could also deliver your wobble goal while you're doing that. So that's incredibly efficient. It's harder, again, it's a lot harder. It might be easier for beginner robots, like when you're starting out in the early months, to just go to this part of the launch line so you get a straightforward shot and then drive here and then deliver your wobble goal. But that takes more time. If you want to be as efficient as possible, go to this part, shoot the rings from farther away, and deliver your robot at the same time, or deliver your wobble goal at the same time. Okay. So yeah, the last thing you do is shoot the ring into the. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So yeah, you shoot the targets and knock them down. Okay. You deposit goal in target zone A, and you remain there to park. Okay. So let's go to case B. In case B, oh wait, why did it say case A? Sorry about that. Wait, did I? Oh, sorry, I made a mistake here. That's okay. So case B, what you do is you start with 3 rings in the wobble goal, and you have 1 ring in the stack. Okay. So what you do is you have remaining ring, your 3 remaining rings on the robot, okay? And you want to shoot all of your preloaded rings to knock down all those targets. Again, you drive up to the line, you shoot the targets down. Then you drive to target zone B right here and you deposit the wobble goal, okay? So you go to the line, you shoot, you drive here, you drop your wobble goal. You then drive to the stack, pick up the 4th ring. So you have 3 rings on your robot, you have 1 ring on the stack. So pick up that ring on the stack and you pick up the ring and then you go and pick up the 2nd wobble goal because you want to score both wobble goals, right? So you pick up the 2nd wobble goal, you go back to the launch line, right? You deposit the 2nd goal in target zone B and then you park on the launch line. Any questions about that? So again, why do you do this, right? So it's basically the best path. So you start with the goal, go to the line, you shoot, deposit the goal, pick up the ring, pick up the goal, deposit the goal, shoot the last ring, and park. Okay? So again, it's just shoot, deposit, pick up, shoot, deposit, park. Kind of simple, but again, this I think is the most efficient way of going about it. Case C, what do you do? So case C is a lot more complicated because there's 4 rings on the stack and you have to make 3 trips. So what you do is you start with 3 rings, you go to the launch line, you shoot those 3 rings, you knock down the power shot targets, right? You drive to target zone C, which is farther away, and you deposit your wobble goal there, okay? You then drive all the way back to the starter stack and you pick up 3 out of the 4 rings. Now, why don't you, who can tell me why you can't pick up all 4 rings? Anyone? Why can't I pick up the 4th ring there? Why can I only pick up 3 out of the 4 rings? Does anyone know?
You get a penalty?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you get a penalty. So your robot can only have 3 rings. You can only control 3 rings at a time. You can't control 4 rings. So you can only pick up 3 of those rings. You have to be very careful. It's autonomous. So you're not controlling the robot. Your robot has to go and pick up those rings by itself. Okay, you can't pick up the 4th ring. So you pick up 3 rings. Again, so you've shot 3 rings, knocked down 3 power shot targets, you've deposited your goal, you pick up 3 more rings, pick up the 2nd power shot target, you pull up to the line and you shoot them in the goal now. You don't shoot the power shot targets, you shoot the goal, right? Because I'm assuming you hit the power shot targets and this is autonomous, so you have no way of knowing whether you hit it or not. So it's best to go and shoot them into the goal. I'd recommend shooting for the highest target. Just because, okay, here's why you should shoot in the highest target. The highest target will give you 12 points in autonomous, right? Let's go check that out. 12 points in autonomous. The middle goal gives you 6 points in autonomous. So in autonomous, you want to shoot the goals into the high, you want to shoot the rings into the high goal unless you're really inaccurate. It's best to shoot the goals into the middle target if you're twice as accurate as you are for the high target. So say you shoot the goals into the high target 30% of the time, which is not that good, but let's say you hit him 30% of the time, okay? That means you'll get about 1 out of every 3 goals. So for 3 rings, you'll only get 12 points. Now let's say you shoot the middle goal 100% of the time. So that means for 3 rings, you get 6 points each. So you actually get 18 points for middle goal. So it's only good to shoot middle goal if you're so much more accurate that it makes a difference. So again, the high goal, you get twice as many points. So you can afford to be half as accurate. Does that make sense? It's a bit of math here. It's a bit of probability here. If you're half as accurate, but you get twice as many points, the value is exactly the same. So in most cases, I would recommend shooting the upper goal. Now, if your robot cannot shoot, if you can't shoot, it's not built to shoot, you can drive up to, you can like go and put them in the low goal. You don't have to be behind the launch line. Again, remember, if you're scoring in the low goal, you don't have to be behind the line. You can go all the way up. You can literally like touch the goal and just literally drop them in there. Now, I'd say that do that if you cannot shoot. Again, if you can shoot your high goal targets 25% of the time, that's actually a better option because you end up getting the same amount of points. And you travel a shorter distance. So it's not recommended that you shoot in the low goal or the middle goal unless you're really, really inaccurate. And you can work towards that, right? Your strategy can change as the season goes on. So, okay, let's go back to it. You use 3 rings, you shoot the power shot targets, you deposit your goal in target zone C, you pick up 3 more rings, pick up the second wobble goal, right? You shoot 3 more rings into the top goal, and you deposit your second goal into target zone C as well. So both goals are in target zone C. You've knocked down 3 power shot targets, and you've shot 3 goals. There's still 1 more ring in the stack. That wasn't the case for B. That was only the case for C. So for B, you shoot the rings, you drive, you deposit here, and you just go to the line. But for C, you can't just go back to the line. You have to drive all the way back to the stack, pick up the last ring, shoot that last ring, and stay on the line, which is way more complicated than A. Remember, for A, all you have to do was pick up the goal, shoot the power shot targets, drop the goal, pick up the second goal, drop it there, and stay there. Case C, you have to pick up the ring. Pick up the goal, deposit the goal, shoot the rings, pick up 3 more rings, shoot those rings, pick up the second goal, drop that goal, pick up the 4th ring, shoot that ring, and stay on the line. It is exponentially more complicated than case A is, but case C will give you way more points. Okay, case C can give you a ton of points here just because you have 4 more rings you can score. If you score all 4 of those rings, that's 48 additional points than case A. 48 points. 48 points. That is a massive amount of points. That can make or break a game. So case C is really, really complicated, but it's worth it because you just have so many chances to score. Okay? And teleup. You don't have an optimal strategy for teleup because you're not telling the robot what to do. You're actually driving it yourself. So you can kind of think about what you have to do during the game. Again, teleup is really straightforward. You just have to shoot the rings into the goals. Just pick up the ring, shoot it in the goal. Pick up the ring, shoot it into the goal. Pick up the ring, shoot it into the goal. If you can't shoot, pick up the ring, drive up to the goal, and put it into the low goal. But again, I don't recommend that. Just stay behind the line, keep shooting them. That's it. So what is this about? Well, in teleup here, what I'm going to do is take time to kind of exploit the rules a little bit. Okay, you want to like take advantage of the rules as much as you can, right? Again, as I said before, in end game, wobble goals right here in this whole highlighted area can be scored. So say it's autonomous, and you take those goals and you drop it in this target zone. Again, I'm just reiterating, in teleup, you can go and take that goal and move it to a better position that can help you out later, even if it's outside of a goal. So you can move from C to A, you can move from C to like this corner over here, it doesn't matter. As long as it's in this highlighted area, they can be scored during endgame. So I think it's worth it to spend some time because again, endgame only lasts 30 seconds. So you'll be stripped for time in endgame. But in teleup, you have a bit more time, so you can go take this goal, move to a better position to make it easier for you in endgame. If you run out of time in endgame, that's something you should definitely do. Another thing you can do is, say you park on the line in autonomous, right? Only one part of your robot has to cross that line. You just have to cross the vertical plane. Remember I said that earlier in the session, you have to cross the vertical plane. So what you can do actually is, say you're in case B, right? In case B, you pick up the goal, drop it in B, you pick up the goal, shoot the power shot targets, drop it in B. Pick up the second ring, pick up the last ring, pick up the last goal, deposit the goal, shoot the ring, and drive back, right? So you shoot the ring, deposit the goal, and drive back to the line. Well, what you can do in B is stay there and stretch out you can stretch out an arm and cross that vertical plane. Do you get what I mean? You get what I'm saying here? You don't have to actually drive back to the launch line. You can just stretch out an arm or a tape measure and get the job done for you. What does that mean? So let's say you're in case C, right? Say you're in case C and you scored that last goal right all the way back here. Your robot can stay in case C. You can grab the wobble goal as long as it's completely inside, right? Let's say the wobble goes right in the middle and you grab it. It's still in the middle, so it counts, but you're all the way over in C. You can then stretch out a tape measure all the way across and hit that launch line. And now this is a crazy situation because you've navigated successfully to the line. You're parked on the line technically because your arm is over it, and you're in control of that wobble goal in zone C. That sets you up for a great position in teleup, because what you can do now in teleup is once teleup starts, you can take your arm, suck it back into your body, right? You then take that goal you're holding and just drive over and plop it in A. So you basically get that done really quickly, and then you can just make a second trip or whatever and take that second goal and move it to A. That just makes it so much easier for you in endgame. So again, this results from a very clear understanding of the rules and what you can do. So almost everyone's going to drive their robot back to the line. What really advanced teams do is probably hold this goal right here and stretch out their arm over the line. Does anyone have any questions about that? That's kind of complicated. It's a very advanced strategy, but does anyone have any questions about that strategy? It's definitely legal. It is completely legal according to the rules. What I recommend you do is look at the forums. If someone asks a question about that on the forums and they say, yeah, you can't do that, then what they say goes, right? But I actually don't think they'll knock that down in the forums. I think they're very deliberate about that in the rules. So that's something that you should be able to do. So again, you can just stick out an arm and navigate there. Also, what you can do is you could try to put some rings onto the wobble goal during teleup. Now, during endgame is when the rings actually are scored. But remember, they're not scored live during endgame. They're scored at rest. What does that mean? At the end of the game is when the rings are scored. So let's say you're in teleup. There's 10 rings on the field in teleup. You can't collect all 10. You can only collect 3, right? So let's say you want to have 6 rings. You have 3 rings on your robot and 3 rings on the field that you can pick up after you shoot. There's 4 more rings. What can you do with those 4 rings? You can take those 4 rings and put them on the wobble goals, so that once the game is over in end game, you get those points. So you can just store them there instead of just having them just lay around uselessly on the field. So that kind of concludes teleup, because teleup there's no specific way of going about it like autonomous. Autonomous, you have a very specific path. There's very specific tasks you can do. There's only really one good way of getting the most points in the shortest amount of time possible. You can make variations on that, but there's only one real main way. In teleup, not the case. You can do whatever you want. It's kind of like a free thing. You can just go around, shoot from here, shoot from there, do this, do that. Order does not matter because you are controlling the robot. But these are some ideas that you could use and implement during teleup. Right? You can start like teleup from right here. Almost everyone's going to start teleup from this launch line because that's where you park in autonomous. But maybe you can start teleup from zone C because you put an arm over the launch line. Right? Maybe you can move those goals to a better position. Maybe you can put rings on the goals to help you out, right? These are some things you can do in teleup. Now, I don't have any strategy for endgame because endgame is kind of straightforward. There's no real way of taking advantage of the rules. Again, in endgame, what you should do is take those rings, shoot the power shot targets, right? And deliver those wobble goals. That's it. So again, shoot the power shot targets, take those wobble goals, throw them over. Let's say you have extra time. What you can do with that extra time is take your last couple of rings, start shooting them into the goals. And let's say there's 10 seconds left in the game. Collect as many rings as you can, 3 at a time, of course, and put them on the goal slowly, right? Maybe what you can do is in teleup, take your goals, move them to A, okay? In endgame, you're still scoring, you still knocked over the power shot targets because you can, right? You still score and score and score. Let's say there's 15 seconds left in endgame. Now you stop scoring and you put all of your rings onto the wobble goals instead, okay? So they're not over the drop zone. They're still in the field. There's still an A over here. They're still eligible to be scored. Endgame started. So now you can move them around and do whatever you want. Maybe you can move A to like a position over here, and you can start putting rings on them really slowly, right? As teleup and endgame progresses. So once endgame is almost done, there's a couple seconds left. You then put 100% of your priority on just taking those rings, putting them on these wobble goals. And maybe your last 5 seconds is taking that wobble goal, dropping it into the launch zone, take a second wobble goal, dropping it into the launch zone. Ideally, each of them should have 5 rings, so you get the full 50 points. But yeah, you shouldn't. I don't think you should focus as much on scoring goals in teleop and endgame as much as setting up your position for these wobble goals. These wobble goals get you 20 points each. And if you put 5 rings, that gives you 25 points each. So that's 90 points if you drop 2 fully loaded wobble goals over the drop zone, which is huge. And you need to score 15 rings into that high goal to get 90 points. So it's good to actually focus a lot of your time on these wobble goals, getting rings on there, right? So yeah, one thing I could say is technically 1 ring gets you 6 points if you score it, and only 5 points if you put it on the wobble goal. So if you're 100% accurate, don't put any rings on the wobble goal. Just spend all your time shooting them, because then you get 1 extra point per ring, get 6 instead of 5. But the thing is, if you have less than an 83% accuracy, it's better to just put the rings on the wobble goal. How do I get 83%? 83% is 5 over 6, right? So if you can score 5 out of every 6 rings, you get 30 points for 6 rings. If you put all 6 rings on the wobble goal, you still get 30 points. So at that point, if you score less than 5 out of every 6 rings, it's just best to put them on the wobble goals, because you get those 5 points as long as you don't. Oh, one thing is, if you tip the goal when you drop it and the rings fall out, or the rings are no longer supported by the wobble goal, you don't get those points anymore. Okay, so that concludes the session. That concludes the rules. That concludes the strategies. Does anyone have any questions about how to play the game, any rules of the game, any niche topics, any strategy? Do you want to, like, if you want to ask, hey, could I do this? Could I do that? Just ask me. I'll tell you if it's legal, if it's advisable. So now is like the Q&A session. Yeah, go ahead. Anyone? Does anyone have any questions about anything? Even if it doesn't have to do with the strategy or whatever, just ask me. Because I do have an understanding of the game. This is my 4th year in FTC, so I am pretty familiar with how, like, the layout of the game is. Feel free to unmute. No?
Alan, great analysis. I did want to say that I think this year the human player is going to be huge, and probably could use some practice delivering those rings to the return.
Yes.
Depending on how you put them in there, they can go to different parts of the field, and where the shooter wants to have them, that's where you need to aim.
I agree. Yeah, the human player last year, all they did was just put the blocks onto the field in Skystone. That's all they really did. Didn't require much skill. A small child could have done it. So, but this year it's a little bit different, right? Because as I said before, the human player takes those rings and drops them back onto the field. So they also reset the power shot targets. Again, that's something a small child could do. The real skill here for the human player is being able to consistently drop those rings. Now, those rings, it's kind of like a cone. So it starts off like this and it kind of widens like this way, right? So the rings start narrow and they can go anywhere and drop and they kind of spread out onto the field. So some can go left, some can go right, some can go straight, some can roll, some can not roll. But ultimately, it's a static thing. Like, it does not move, it doesn't change. So theoretically, if you have a ring and you drop it the same way every time, it should end up in the same place every time. So if you practice and you get like really good at dropping the rings like the same way, it doesn't get snagged on anything or whatever, then you could become somewhat consistent in dropping those rings on the field that end up in a similar place over time. Ideally, right? You want to have your robot right here. You want to drop your ring, and so that it lands right next to your robot, so your robot can just pick it up and keep shooting it. The best teams will have that going for them. It's going to be very, very hard. That's something that's really hard to perfect, just because there's so much variability. It's kind of random, but yeah, that's a great point that you make. The human player, the human player should drop hundreds of rings and get good at that.
Reminds me of foosball games when you return the ball to the field.
Oh yeah, true. Yeah,
to your guys or not.
Right. Yeah. Actually, that's a great analogy. In foosball, you drop the ball, and it should be kind of random. But again, I've learned, like, if you shoot the ball, you can kind of launch it in the air and hit it with like an upside down player and just send a flying ball into the goal. Yeah. But yeah, it's a great analogy because that's something you can do here. Any other questions?
I have also one caution is that, you had a great strategy of putting the rings on the wobble goals, before the end game. But that,
Yes.
putting them on the wobble goal itself, it could be considered, accomplishing the end game tasks before the beginning of the end game. So we have to see how that's going to be ruled.
Yeah, so technically you actually don't get any of the points, right? There's nothing that says you can't do the end game tasks before the end game. You just don't get any points for them. For example, if you stay behind the launch line and you shoot the power shot targets in telly-up, like I said, you get 0 points for them. You don't get penalized for them. They don't say you can't do that. It's just a complete waste of your time. But things that happen that are scored at rest will actually get you points. And I actually think you can put the rings on during telly-up. Here's why. What they do is they put, for example, last year, you know how you stack those, stack the blocks in Skystone, right? What they did was they actually put that in the end game section because the stacked blocks are scored at rest. So they imply heavily that you should be scoring those rings during telly-up as well. You can score the rings into the goal, and you can also put the rings on the wall goal targets. Let me see how they phrase that. But
in-game
yeah.
task is they started or completed, or completed. So that's why I think that could be considered completed if it's on the wobble goal, even though it's not at rest at the end of the game.
Yeah, but it's a very similar way because what they did was last year they said last year at the end so they put it in end game. In end game, any block completely supported by the foundation or another block gains you the allotted points. This year they're saying each ring completely supported by the wobble goal or another ring completely at the end of the period earns you 5 points. It's the same wording. I think they do because what they do is it's scored at rest. So you can theoretically do it during autonomous as well, although it'll be a very bad idea because you can't get those rings back.
What do you think about delivering the wobble zone to the wobble goal to the drop zone in telly-up?
That's a bad idea because
That's the same idea though?
No, it's actually not the same idea because the wobble goals are only eligible to be scored at the start of endgame. So if the wobble goal is not in that, see this highlighted area? If the wobble goal is not in the highlighted area at the start of endgame, it gets 0 points. So if you take the wobble goal and you move it here during telly-up and endgame starts, that wobble goal is now just a piece of plastic. It has no meaning. If you drop it over, if you put rings on it, doesn't matter. You can't score it. So that's the difference.
End up being a ruling on it.
Yeah, I agree though. Maybe you can't put it in the rings, but I think the way they phrase the rules heavily implies that this isn't even a loophole. I think this is just the way
I agree with you
be played.
That if it's not ruled against, you should definitely do it because it's a huge advantage.
Yeah. I think so. There are two loopholes here. The one loophole is moving the wobble goal from C to A, like moving it during telly-up. I think that's a loophole. I also think that like stretching your arm across the line is a loophole. I think both of them will be allowed because similar things have been done in previous years. But I don't think putting the rings on the goals is actually a loophole in telly-up. I think it's just a part of the game. Because endgame tasks are still a part of telly-up. It's just scored at the end of the game. But yeah, that's a very good point. Maybe you could
just a general question.
Yeah.
Would you have your slide deck available? Or could we get in touch with you and then maybe make a presentation for some of the Nevada teams?
Sure, actually, I can. Here's what I'll do. I will. I'll post a link here. Copy the link. And put it in the chat. But yeah, so any other questions, any last questions? I think we're gonna end this in about a minute or so. Sorry for going over a little bit. But yeah, if you have no more questions, feel free to leave. Thank you so much for listening, participating. I enjoyed your questions. I enjoyed presenting this to you. I hope this helps you out in some way. If you want to know more, I got all of this from the forum and from the game manual part 2. So if you want to know about the rules, go to the game manual part 2, read up on that, present some great language. Mine was a summarized version, but it made sure to get, I spent a lot of time making sure that all of the phrasing was very accurate to what they said. If you want to get some insight about the penalties and things you cannot do, I didn't go over that. So make sure you go to game manual part 2 of ultimate goal, and make sure you hit the remote game manual. There's 2 game manual part 2s, one for in-person, one for remote. So make sure you do the remote one if you're doing the remote game, because the rules are slightly different. So that concludes the session. Thank you so much.